Recently, on social media platforms, there have been many articles about famous prophets' prophecies about the year 2025, of which Nostradamus' prophecy is considered the most terrifying and dangerous. In his predictions, people can see an extremely dark year in 2025. Especially in his poems, people can see signs of these prophecies that have begun to appear. Will these signs change differently, or will they happen exactly as Nostradamus predicted in 2025? Join us as we explore Nostradamus' terrifying predictions for 2025 and discover what signs are starting to bloom. From the beginning of the year until now, we have experienced many shocking events. Many people believe that these events seem to coincide with the mysterious prophecies of Nostradamus. Although some people do not believe in his quatrains, after witnessing recent events, they have more faith in his predictions. The most prominent example is Donald Trump's near loss of life and his recent rise to victory before the 47th U.S. presidential election. This precision is coupled with a series of horrifying events, from the massive storms that devastated the United States to the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine. As we get closer to 2025, some of the signs he predicted are already starting to appear. What terrifying events will appear next year? Now let's explore it together. According to Nostradamus' prediction, 2025 could be the year the beginning of a global war breaks out. This large-scale war will not only threaten the lives of millions of people, but also cause horrifying destruction to infrastructure, the economy, and the environment. Countries could fall into chaos, with shortages of food, clean water, and essential resources, creating global humanitarian and social crises. The worrying thing is that the year 2025 has not yet entered, and the signs of triggering this catastrophic event have begun to appear. The situation in some countries is currently very tense. Initially, the incident was only limited to the confrontation between Russia and Ukraine, but recently it has become much more serious with the participation of North Korea and the United States. Recently, what do you think about this prediction? Please share your opinions with us in the comments below, and click the subscribe button to wait for more miraculous prophecies. Come back to the content. Nostradamus' next terrifying prophecy is about a new pandemic that could break out in 2025. According to Nostradamus' prediction, in 2025, new pandemics will break out from one country and will quickly spread globally. According to his quatrains, silent plague, unseen dread, hope lies faint compassion. Midnight's breath, sick confide, human strength cast aside. According to Damus, this pandemic will be much more dangerous than the COVID-19 pandemic, and there will not be just one type of disease, but many strange diseases that will appear. When people get infected, it will be difficult to survive, and it will take a long time to create a vaccine. The possibility of a pandemic breaking out in 2025 is quite high when there are currently many dangerous signs of it. From the Australian laboratory losing hundreds of samples of dangerous diseases, to humans that cannot be found, to the discovery of a new disease that has just begun to appear in Africa. Quite a few people have died from it, and the speed at which it spreads is terrifying. With that frequency of spread, experts say it could spread globally, and experts warn that the US could also face the risk of new emerging diseases. However, the World Health Organization and medical facilities are closely monitoring the situation, so it is possible that this disease can be controlled to some extent. But we cannot guarantee that in the future, it will not break out and endanger us. Interestingly, surrounding the disappearance of hundreds of vials of dangerous solutions to humans in Australia, some people have hypothesized that they sold it to a certain force to cause an epidemic and then prepared a proprietary vaccine to sell and make a profit on people's lives, like creating a problem and then selling the solution in business. What do you think about this interesting hypothesis? If you find this hypothesis interesting, give us a like to support us. Now we come to Nostradamus' next prophecy about the year 2025. According to Nostradamus' prediction in 2025, focusing too much on space exploration will cause a lot of damage to the Earth and human life. According to Nostradamus' prediction in 2025, focusing too much on space exploration will cause a lot of damage to the Earth and human life. According to Damus, investing in space projects requires a huge amount of financial, technological, and human resources, which can lead to negative impacts on urgent issues on Earth. First, Large investments in space exploration can reduce the budget for projects to develop renewable energy, protect the environment, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This can slow down the response to climate change, making natural disasters more dangerous and threatening the survival of humans on Earth. In addition, in the context of many countries and regions still facing poverty, lack of healthcare, education, and clean water, prioritizing resources for space projects can deepen the gap between rich and poor and global inequality. A typical sign of this prophecy is SpaceX's statement that it wants to turn Starbase into a city as a stepping stone to building a gateway to Mars by 2025. However, if space exploration is carefully considered, ensuring that these projects do not negatively affect more urgent needs, it can help humans discover new secrets of the vast universe and even find a second Earth. In his quatrains, Nostradamus is said to have made predictions that implicate Donald Trump when he returns to power in early 2025. According to Nostradamus, the re-election of Donald Trump next year will bring changes not only to his life, but also to the global economy and politics. Nostradamus's writings contain a passage referencing a leader who will rise to power and face threats from an underground force. This has led some to speculate about Trump, who endured significant challenges during his election campaigns. If he assumes office in 2025, will this force oppose him further, or will it retreat and allow him to govern unimpeded? Only time will reveal the accuracy of this prophecy. The prediction also alludes to potential deepening divisions in the United States during Trump's return to power. Misguided decisions and poorly thought-out policies could usher in a period of instability, weakening both the national and global economies. Financial markets might spiral into disorder, triggering trade wars among nations and the disintegration of international alliances. The repercussions could extend far beyond the US, shaping a tumultuous global landscape. However, Trump's coming to power in 2025 could be the thing that saves the world from a devastating war. Given Joe Biden's decisions to ignite the war between Russia and Ukraine, we expect Trump's return even more, when he recently asked these two countries to stop the war. But because he has not officially returned to power, his words will not stop these two countries. But maybe next year, when Trump officially takes power, he can put an end to this war, helping the world to peace. Damas's predictions are like a warning to Trump about his safety and the decisions he makes. May God protect Trump once again so that he can bring America back to glory and resolve the war wisely and safely. Nostradamus's next prediction opens up a dark scene of a world devastated by natural disasters. In the context of increasingly serious climate change, Nostradamus's prophecies of a harsh future become even more alarming. His verses are like a haunting warning, painting a gloomy picture. The oceans rise, the forests burn, storms roar, the earth shakes. Harmony is broken by endless demand. Nature's revenge sows disaster. The cause of these disasters, according to Nostradamus, is human greed that has broken the natural balance. Although there is no specific scientific basis, Nostradamus's predictions coincide with many warnings from modern scientists about climate change and environmental disasters. The image of wheat prices so high that people are tempted to eat their fellow humans in desperation is like a terrifying prophecy, predicting a dark future where morality and humanity are lost. Hunger and conflicts can increase social inequality, threatening world peace. Will Nostradamus's prediction come true? This question remains controversial. However, it is undeniable that the Earth is groaning under the impact of humans. Climate change, environmental pollution, loss of biodiversity are urgent issues that require us to act now. The future of the planet is in our hands. Each individual can contribute to building a sustainable future by changing lifestyles, saving energy, protecting the environment. More importantly, we need to cooperate globally to find long-term solutions to global problems. Please like and hit the subscribe button below to discover more interesting predictions in the future. Nostradamus's next prophecy is about Pope Francis's farewell. Could Nostradamus's prophecies predict the future of the Catholic Church? In Prophecies, Nostradamus painted a colorful picture of a period of transition, with great conflict and upheaval. His enigmatic verses, especially those related to the Pope, have attracted much attention. As speculation about Pope Francis's health has grown, Nostradamus's predictions about a new pope have become even more remarkable. One particular quatrain hinted at a young, energetic pope succeeding an older one. This has fueled much speculation about the future of the Catholic Church. Will the Church undergo a renewal under the leadership of a new pope? As the year 2025 unfolds, the world is watching with curiosity and concern. Nostradamus's predictions about the Catholic Church have become the focus of attention, sparking heated debates about the future of one of the world's largest religious institutions. According to Nostradamus, 2025 will be the year the world map is redrawn, with completely new power structures. This prophecy of Nostradamus is like a harbinger of a dark future. The year 2025, according to the prophet, will be the year when the global power structure is on the brink of collapse. The specter of war lurks across continents, and the wrath of nature is awakening. Nostradamus's vision suggests the decline of empires, leading to chaos and instability across the globe. As the world's population skyrockets, resources are depleted, and the huge migration of people will sweep away all barriers, causing conflicts and social unrest. Nostradamus's prophecies also cast a shadow over Russia. The mysterious prophet predicted the weakening of power and the rise of opposing forces, plunging the country into a period of chaos. This could lead to large-scale geopolitical conflicts, threatening world peace. His cryptic quatrain, "Doubt in leaders, currencies sway in search of answers," could suggest a global financial crisis and the collapse of traditional monetary systems. Some interpret this as India's emergence as a global superpower, reshaping the geopolitical landscape through innovation and digital transformation. According to Nostradamus, 2025 will be the year the door to the universe opens, revealing the mysteries of extraterrestrial life. Nostradamus's prophecies are like mysterious doors, leading us into a vast and surprising universe. He revealed clues about the existence of extraterrestrial beings, transcendent entities that have been observing humans since ancient times. In his vision, the universe is like a velvet curtain slowly opening, revealing the mysteries of extraterrestrial life that Nostradamus predicted long ago. The meeting between two civilizations could usher in a new era of human consciousness. The dream of telepathic communication may soon come true, as the boundaries between souls dissolve. Imagine a world where thoughts and feelings can be shared instantly, promoting empathy and understanding on a global scale. Yet, behind the hopes of a bright future, we also face challenging questions. Are we ready for a historic encounter where questions about the origin and meaning of life will be raised with greater urgency than ever? When we come into contact with beings from outside, we may face profound cultural differences, different moral values, and even inevitable conflict. Like spectral whispers from the past, Nostradamus's prophecies echo through the turbulent waters of 2025. Are they a glimpse into a predetermined future, or a call to action to rewrite the narrative of our collective destiny? Nostradamus's verses are like broken mirrors, reflecting vague images of the future, leaving us constantly searching for the missing pieces. Is there such a thing as a person who can see the future? Nostradamus, with his enigmatic predictions, made this question more fascinating than ever. His cryptic quatrains, filled with mysterious symbols and veiled references, have been interpreted to predict major historical events, from the French Revolution to the rise and fall of empires. Nostradamus's method of prediction was based on a combination of astrology, numerology, and mysterious symbols. His verses were often written in the form of riddles, requiring readers to decipher them. This is what makes his predictions so fascinating and difficult to verify. While some dismiss his prophecies as mere coincidences or clever wordplay, others believe that Nostradamus possesses a unique ability to see into the future. Regardless of one's perspective, his enduring legacy as a prophetic figure continues to fascinate and intrigue. Nostradamus's predictions have inspired numerous works of literature, film, and music. Whether or not Nostradamus's predictions were accurate, he remains a legendary figure who continues to intrigue and debate humanity. If you truly desire to deepen your faith and strengthen your relationship with God, take intentional time this week to reflect on how He is calling you to prepare for the future, both in this life and in eternity. Begin by setting aside moments of quietness and solitude to seek His presence. Open your heart in prayer, asking Him to reveal the areas of your life that need transformation, growth, or realignment with his divine will. Allow Scripture to guide your reflection, meditating on passages that speak to your current season of life and inspire you to trust in his perfect plan. As you pray and reflect, consider how your daily choices, actions, and relationships reflect your faith and trust in God's purpose for you. Are there areas where you feel called to step out in obedience or make changes to align more closely with his desires? Take time to evaluate whether you are investing in things that have eternal value, such as love, kindness, generosity, and faithfulness, or if you are overly focused on temporary worldly pursuits. Remember that preparing for the future is not only about anticipating challenges, but also about cultivating a strong spiritual foundation that will sustain you through life's uncertainties. Think about how you can grow in faith and live with purpose each day. Recognize that every decision, big or small, contributes to your spiritual journey and carries eternal significance. Embrace this opportunity to seek God's guidance with an open and willing heart, ready to follow wherever he leads you. Whether it's through acts of service, building deeper relationships, or spending more time in worship, let your life reflect the trust and hope you have in his promises. As you take these steps, listen attentively for his voice, whether it comes through scripture, prayer, or the wisdom of those around you. Be ready to respond with courage and humility, trusting that he will equip you for whatever lies ahead. Preparing for the future in this way not only strengthens your faith, but also fills your life with purpose, peace, and a deeper understanding of God's love. May God watch over you and your loved ones, surrounding you with his protection, guidance, and peace. May you find strength in his presence and joy in walking the path he has set before you. Amen. Now we will listen to the parables in the Bible. The parable of the rich fool. The parable of the rich fool offers a powerful lesson about greed, priorities, and the fleeting nature of material wealth. It begins with a man in the crowd asking Jesus for help in resolving a family inheritance dispute. The man says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." In response, Jesus replies, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbitrator over you?" Then, addressing the crowd, Jesus issues a warning. Beware. Guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. To illustrate this point, Jesus shares a parable about a rich man whose land produced an exceptionally bountiful harvest. Overwhelmed by his abundance, the man begins to contemplate how he can store all his crops. He reasons to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he decides on a plan. "I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' However, God interrupts the man's plans, declaring, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they are?' Jesus concludes the parable by saying, 'So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich toward God.'" This parable is a profound commentary on the dangers of greed and misplaced priorities. Jesus highlights how easily people can become consumed by the pursuit of wealth and possessions, neglecting the more significant spiritual and relational aspects of life. The rich man's internal monologue reveals a self-centered perspective. His focus is entirely on himself, as evidenced by the repeated use of first-person pronouns. He is preoccupied with storing his wealth and ensuring his comfort, with no thought of others or gratitude to God for his abundance. The rich man's actions reflect a mindset often seen in today's world, where success and security are frequently measured by material accumulation. The man does not consider sharing his wealth with those in need, nor does he recognize that his abundance is a blessing from God. St. Augustine critiques this attitude, pointing out that the man planned to fill his barns but ignored the empty stomachs of the poor. Augustine suggests that the bellies of the poor are far safer storerooms than any physical barn, emphasizing the eternal value of generosity and compassion. One of the central messages of the parable is the futility of relying on wealth to guarantee the future. The rich man believes that his abundance will secure his happiness and ease for many years, yet he fails to account for the uncertainty of life. God's intervention underscores the fragility of human plans. This very night your soul is required of you. The man's sudden death renders his wealth meaningless, as he cannot take it with him. This serves as a reminder that life is fragile and unpredictable, and no amount of material wealth can protect against the inevitability of death. The parable also critiques the rich man's failure to consider eternal matters. Jesus warns against storing up treasures for oneself without being rich toward God. This phrase emphasizes the importance of spiritual wealth, faith, love, generosity, and a deep relationship with God, over material riches. Cornelius a Lapide elaborates on this idea, explaining that Jesus sought to cure the man of his greed and teach him to prioritize heavenly over earthly concerns. The rich man's foolishness lies not only in his assumption that wealth can secure his future, but also in his neglect of his spiritual responsibilities and his lack of awareness of God's greater plan. This theme of spiritual readiness is a recurring message in Jesus' teachings. In Matthew 24:42, Jesus instructs his followers to stay vigilant. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. The rich man's sudden death mirrors the unpredictability of the day of judgment, which arrives without warning. His unpreparedness serves as a cautionary tale for all who place their trust in worldly possessions rather than in God. The rich man's approach to life contrasts sharply with the psalmist's expression of trust and contentment in God. Return unto thy rest, O my soul, for the Lord hath dealt bountifully with thee. While the rich man seeks security in his wealth, the psalmist finds peace in God's provision and faithfulness. Ellicott's commentary highlights this difference, noting that the psalmist's rest is characterized by a quiet conscience and a trusting heart, unlike the rich man's anxious hoarding. Arlen J. Hultgren notes that the parable provides a clear example of what not to do. The rich man's identity is entirely tied to his possessions, leading him to neglect the needs of his neighbors and the call of God. His self-centeredness blinds him to the greater purpose of his wealth, which could have been used to bless others and glorify God. In modern times, the parable of the rich fool remains highly relevant. Many people are driven by the desire to accumulate wealth, status, and achievements, often at the expense of their spiritual health and relationships. The parable challenges us to examine our priorities and consider whether we are storing treasures in heaven or merely accumulating earthly riches. It calls us to shift our focus from self-serving goals to a life of generosity, gratitude, and faithfulness to God. Ultimately, the parable is a reminder that life is short, and its true value lies not in what we possess, but in how we live and whom we serve. Jesus' words urge us to be rich toward God by investing in eternal treasures, faith, love, and service to others. As we reflect on this lesson, may we strive to align our lives with God's purposes, seeking not the fleeting comforts of this world, but the lasting rewards of His kingdom. The parable of the strong man. The parable of the strong man is a powerful metaphor used by Jesus to illustrate his authority over Satan and the significance of his ministry. This parable appears in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, each providing slightly different wording but delivering a consistent message. It occurs within the context of the Beelzebul controversy, where Jesus is accused by his opponents of casting out demons through the power of Beelzebul, another name for Satan. Jesus uses this parable to refute their accusations and to explain the nature of his mission on earth. The parable is as follows. In Matthew 12:29, Jesus says, "Or how can someone enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods, unless he first binds the strong man? Then indeed he may plunder his house." In this context, Jesus is directly addressing the accusation that his power to exorcise demons comes from Satan. He explains that such a claim is illogical, as it would mean Satan is working against himself. Instead, Jesus emphasizes that his power to cast out demons demonstrates his authority over Satan. By using the metaphor of the strong man, Jesus conveys the idea that before one can take possession of what belongs to a strong man, the strong man must first be subdued. The same parable appears in Mark 3:27, where Jesus says, "No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his house." This reiteration further emphasizes that Jesus' exorcisms are not acts of cooperation with Satan, but evidence of his superiority and ability to overpower him. Jesus uses the imagery of tying up the strong man to illustrate his victory over Satan, who is metaphorically guarding his possessions, representing the people under his influence. By binding Satan, Jesus liberates these individuals, demonstrating his divine mission to bring freedom and salvation. Luke's account in Luke 11:21-22 provides a slightly expanded version of the parable. When the strong man, fully armed, guards his dwelling, his goods are safe. But when someone stronger attacks him and overcomes him, he takes from him his whole armor in which he trusted and divides his spoils. This version emphasizes not only the strength of the strong man, Satan, but also the superior power of the one who overcomes him, Jesus. The imagery of taking away the strong man's armor highlights the completeness of Jesus' victory, stripping Satan of the tools he relies on to maintain control and dominion. The parable is often interpreted within the broader context of spiritual warfare. In this interpretation, the strong man represents Satan, who is depicted as having authority over the earth and its inhabitants due to humanity's fall into sin. His house is the world, and his goods are the people under his influence. Jesus, as the stronger man, enters Satan's domain, binds him, and liberates those held captive. This act of binding is symbolic of Jesus' ministry, including his exorcisms, teachings, and ultimately his death and resurrection, which defeat Satan's power once and for all. The connection between this parable and Old Testament prophecy further deepens its meaning. Some scholars, such as R.T. France, see an echo of Isaiah 49:24-25, which says, "Can plunder be taken from warriors, or captives rescued from the fierce?" But this is what the Lord says: "Yes, captives will be taken from warriors, and plunder retrieved from the fierce. I will contend with those who contend with you, and your children I will save." This passage describes God's promise to rescue his people from their oppressors, a theme that aligns with Jesus' mission to liberate humanity from the grip of sin and Satan. By referencing the strong man and his house, Jesus may be drawing on this prophetic imagery to underscore his role as the one who fulfills God's promise of deliverance. The term Beelzebul, which is central to the controversy, is thought to mean Lord of the House, or House of Baal. This adds a layer of wordplay to the parable, as the image of the strong man's house could be seen as a direct challenge to the dominion associated with Beelzebul. Jesus' assertion that he has entered the house and bound the strong man symbolizes his authority to dismantle Satan's kingdom and establish God's reign. Interestingly, the parable also appears in the non-canonical Gospel of Thomas, albeit without the Beelzebul controversy as its context. In this version, the parable is interpreted differently, suggesting that the strong man must be free to protect his house and belongings, while the thief must understand the situation to accomplish his goal of plundering. This interpretation focuses more on the practical dynamics of the story, rather than its spiritual implications. It lacks the emphasis on Jesus' victory over Satan, highlighting how the context in which a parable is presented shapes its interpretation. Ultimately, the parable of the strong man is a profound statement about the nature of Jesus' ministry and the spiritual reality of his mission. It illustrates that Jesus' power comes not from cooperation with Satan, but from his divine authority to confront and overcome evil. The strong man represents the enemy's control over the world, while Jesus, as the stronger one, demonstrates that he has the power to defeat Satan and reclaim what rightfully belongs to God. This victory is not just a theological concept, but a practical reality, evidenced by Jesus' ability to cast out demons and transform lives. For modern readers, this parable serves as a reminder of the ongoing spiritual battle and the assurance of Christ's ultimate victory. It challenges believers to recognize Jesus as the one who has bound the strong man and invites them to trust in his power to deliver and protect them from the forces of evil. It also emphasizes the importance of aligning oneself with Christ, the stronger man, who has already won the battle on behalf of humanity. The parable of the talents. The parable of the talents, found in Matthew 25:14-30, is one of Jesus' most profound teachings, conveying lessons on responsibility, faithfulness, and the consequences of how individuals use what they have been entrusted with. The parable tells the story of a master who, before embarking on a journey, entrusts his property to 3 of his servants. Each servant receives a different amount of wealth based on their abilities. One servant is given 5 talents, another 2, and the last only 1. In ancient times, a talent was an enormous sum of money, symbolizing significant responsibility. The total sum entrusted to the 3 servants was 8 talents, a remarkable amount that underscores the trust and expectation the master had for them. After a long time away, the master returns and calls his servants to account for how they managed what was entrusted to them. The first servant, who was given 5 talents, reports that he invested the money and doubled it, presenting 10 talents to his master. Similarly, the second servant, who was given 2 talents, also doubled the original amount and presented 4 talents. Both are met with the master's praise and reward. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord." This statement not only acknowledges their efforts, but also reflects the principle of stewardship, where faithfulness in smaller responsibilities leads to greater opportunities. However, the third servant, who was entrusted with just 1 talent, offers a very different report. He admits to hiding the talent in the ground out of fear, returning it to the master unused and unimproved. His explanation reveals his view of the master as a harsh and demanding figure. "Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed." The master responds with condemnation, calling the servant wicked and slothful. He rebukes the servant for failing to even deposit the money with bankers, where it could have earned interest. The master orders the 1 talent to be taken from the servant and given to the one with 10 talents. Finally, the unfaithful servant is cast into outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. In this parable, the talents symbolize far more than money. Traditionally, they have been understood as representing the gifts, abilities, and opportunities God entrusts to each individual. The parable challenges believers to use these gifts in service to God and others. The first 2 servants demonstrate faithfulness and initiative, using their resources to produce a return that pleases the master. In contrast, the third servant exemplifies fear, complacency, and a failure to understand the master's expectations, resulting in severe judgment. Luke's Gospel, Luke 19:12-27, includes a similar story, the parable of the minas, which further develops the themes of stewardship and accountability. In this version, a nobleman gives 10 servants 1 mina each and instructs them to trade with it while he travels to a distant country to receive a kingdom. Upon his return, he evaluates their efforts. Like the parable of the talents, the faithful servants are rewarded for their diligence, while the unfaithful servant faces condemnation. However, Luke adds unique elements, including citizens who oppose the nobleman's rule and are later punished, as well as the explicit mention of the nobleman obtaining a kingdom. These additions reflect Luke's focus on the eschatological dimension of Jesus' teachings, emphasizing the coming of God's kingdom and the accountability that follows. Scholars have explored multiple interpretations of the parable of the talents, reflecting its rich layers of meaning. Theologically, the master is often understood to represent Christ, and his journey symbolizes Jesus' ascension to heaven and eventual return at the end of time. The servants represent believers who are entrusted with spiritual and material resources to further God's purposes during Christ's absence. The reckoning upon the master's return corresponds to the final judgment, where faithfulness is rewarded and negligence is condemned. Cornelius a Lapide, a renowned biblical commentator, expands on this interpretation by identifying the talents as encompassing all gifts from God, spiritual, natural, and material. These include virtues like faith, hope, and charity, as well as personal abilities such as intelligence, prudence, and eloquence, and external resources like wealth and social status. Lapide emphasizes that these gifts are distributed unequally, reflecting God's wisdom and purposes, but they all carry the same expectation: that they are used for God's glory and the benefit of others. The parable also highlights the spiritual dangers of fear and misunderstanding. The third servant's failure stems from his perception of the master as harsh and unjust, leading him to bury his talent rather than take any risks. This contrasts with the first 2 servants, who view the master positively and act with confidence. Some commentators suggest that the third servant's actions reflect a deeper spiritual issue, a lack of trust in God's goodness and a failure to embrace the freedom and responsibility of serving Him. This interpretation reminds believers that their perception of God profoundly influences their willingness to use their gifts faithfully. In addition to its spiritual and theological meanings, the parable of the talents has been interpreted in various other ways. Some see it as a critique of religious leaders, particularly the scribes and Pharisees, who were entrusted with God's word but failed to share it with others. Joachim Jeremias suggests that the parable originally targeted these leaders, holding them accountable for their failure to steward God's gifts faithfully. Others, like William R. Herzog II, view the parable through the lens of liberation theology, interpreting the absentee master as a symbol of exploitative systems, and the third servant as a whistleblower who exposes the injustices of the first two servants. This perspective reframes the parable as a critique of economic and social oppression. The parable has also inspired artistic and literary reflections, notably John Milton's sonnet, "When I Consider How My Light Is Spent." In this poem, Milton wrestles with his perceived inability to serve God due to his blindness, drawing on the parable's themes of accountability and trust in God's purposes. The poem's conclusion, "They also serve who only stand and wait," offers a nuanced perspective on the relationship between human effort and divine grace. Ultimately, the parable of the talents calls believers to reflect on how they use the gifts and opportunities God has given them. It challenges them to act with faith, diligence, and trust, avoiding complacency and fear. Whether interpreted as a call to stewardship, a critique of leadership, or a reflection on God's justice, the parable remains a timeless and multifaceted teaching about responsibility, faithfulness, and the kingdom of God. The parable of the unforgiving servant. The parable of the unforgiving servant is a powerful teaching of Jesus, given in response to a question from Peter about the limits of forgiveness. Peter, perhaps seeking to understand the expectations of mercy within God's kingdom, asks Jesus, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Peter's suggestion of 7 times likely reflects a generous standard, as Jewish tradition often emphasizes forgiving up to 3 times. However, Jesus challenges this notion, replying, "I tell you not 7 times, but 70 times 7. This response shifts the focus from counting offenses to embodying limitless forgiveness, setting the stage for the parable. Jesus begins the parable by describing a king who wishes to settle accounts with his servants. One servant is brought before him who owes an astronomical debt of 10,000 talents. To understand the weight of this figure, it is essential to recognize that a single talent was equivalent to 6,000 denarii, and 1 denarius represented the typical day's wages for a laborer. 10,000 talents, therefore, amounts to an unimaginable sum, approximately 200,000 years' worth of wages. The inclusion of such an absurdly large debt underscores the servant's total inability to repay and highlights the magnitude of what is about to unfold. Because the servant cannot pay, the king orders that he, along with his wife, children, and possessions, be sold to settle the debt. This action reflects the legal practices of the time, where debtors could be sold into slavery as a means of repayment. Faced with this devastating judgment, the servant falls to his knees and pleads with the king, saying, "Lord, have patience with me, and I will repay everything." The servant's promise to repay the debt is impossible given the staggering amount owed, but his desperation is clear. Remarkably, the king is moved with compassion. Rather than granting the servant more time to repay, a mercy in itself, the king does something extraordinary. He forgives the debt entirely, wiping the slate clean. This act of mercy is both unprecedented and profound, symbolizing the boundless grace of God. However, the parable takes a shocking turn. The forgiven servant, upon leaving the king's presence, encounters a fellow servant who owes him a much smaller debt, 100 denarii, or roughly 100 days' wages. Compared to the 10,000 talents he had owed, this amount is almost negligible. Despite the enormous mercy he has just received, the forgiven servant reacts harshly. He grabs his fellow servant by the throat and demands repayment. When the second servant falls to his knees and begs for patience using nearly the same words the first servant had used before the king, the forgiven servant refuses. Instead, he has the man thrown into prison until the debt is paid. This act of cruelty does not go unnoticed. The other servants, who witness what has happened, are deeply distressed and report the incident to the king. Upon hearing of the forgiven servant's actions, the king summons him and delivers a scathing rebuke. "You wicked servant! I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?" Enraged by the servant's lack of compassion and his failure to reflect the mercy he received, the king delivers him to the jailers to be tortured until he can repay his debt, a debt so vast it is impossible to repay. Jesus concludes the parable with a sobering warning. "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart." With these words, Jesus emphasizes the necessity of genuine, heartfelt forgiveness among believers. The parable reveals that forgiveness is not merely an act of generosity, but a fundamental expectation in the kingdom of heaven. Those who receive God's mercy are called to extend that same mercy to others, reflecting God's character in their relationships. The parable's use of extreme figures and situations underscores its spiritual significance. The 10,000 talents represent the immense debt of sin that humanity owes to God, a debt so vast that no human effort could ever repay it. The king's decision to forgive this debt illustrates the infinite grace and mercy of God, who cancels the sin of those who seek his forgiveness. In contrast, the 100 denarii owed by the second servant symbolize the relatively minor offenses people commit against one another. The disparity between the two debts highlights the hypocrisy and ingratitude of the forgiven servant, who refuses to show even a fraction of the mercy he received. The historical and cultural context further deepens the parable's meaning. 10,000 was the largest numeral in Greece, and talent was the highest unit of currency, making 10,000 talents the largest conceivable debt. For comparison, the annual tribute paid by Judea, Samaria, and Idumea to Rome was only 600 talents. This astronomical sum underscores the servant's hopeless situation and the extraordinary nature of the king's forgiveness. Meanwhile, the 100 denarii owed by the second servant, though significant, pales in comparison, emphasizing the moral failure of the first servant's lack of mercy. The parable also serves as a critique of human nature. The forgiven servant's actions reveal how easily people can accept mercy for themselves while withholding it from others. His refusal to forgive reflects a misunderstanding of the king's grace, treating it as an entitlement rather than a gift. This attitude stands in stark contrast to the king's generosity and compassion, highlighting the servant's moral failure. Theologically, the parable connects forgiveness to the broader themes of grace, justice, and accountability. It teaches that forgiveness is not optional, but essential for those who belong to God's kingdom. The severity of the king's judgment against the unmerciful servant serves as a warning that those who refuse to forgive others risk forfeiting the forgiveness they have received. This aligns with Jesus' teaching in the Lord's Prayer. "Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors." Matthew 6:12. In addition to its theological implications, the parable offers practical lessons for daily life. It challenges believers to examine their hearts and attitudes toward forgiveness, asking whether they reflect God's mercy in their relationships. It reminds them that forgiveness is not about condoning wrongdoing, but about releasing bitterness and extending grace, just as God has done for them. The parable also underscores the importance of humility, gratitude, and empathy, encouraging believers to view others through the lens of God's love. Ultimately, the parable of the unforgiving servant is a timeless reminder of the transformative power of forgiveness. It calls believers to embrace the grace they have received from God and to extend that grace to others, living as true citizens of the kingdom of heaven. The parable of the unjust judge. The parable of the persistent widow, also known as the parable of the unjust judge, is a deeply insightful teaching from Jesus, recorded in Luke 18:1-8. This parable delivers a profound message about perseverance in prayer, trust in God's justice, and the necessity of unwavering faith. Luke introduces the parable with its purpose clearly stated: to encourage the disciples to always pray and not give up. This framing emphasizes the importance of persistent faith, especially when answers to prayers seem delayed or when life's challenges feel insurmountable. Jesus begins by presenting two key characters in the story. First is a judge in a certain town, described as a man who neither feared God nor cared about people. This judge is an archetype of corruption and indifference, showing no concern for divine authority or human justice. His portrayal as morally deficient and self-serving sets the stage for the widow's plight. The second character is a widow, representing one of the most vulnerable groups in ancient society. Widows often faced significant hardship, lacking legal protection and social support. This widow repeatedly approaches the judge with the plea, "Grant me justice against my adversary." Her persistent appeals highlight both her desperation and her unwavering determination. She has no means to bribe or influence the judge through power or status. Her only recourse is her relentless approach, a testament to her resilience in seeking justice. Initially, the judge refuses to help her, likely because her case offers no personal benefit to him. However, over time, her persistence wears him down. The judge reasons to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care about people, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so she won't eventually wear me out with her coming." Despite his lack of moral conviction, the judge grants the widow's request, not out of compassion or duty, but simply to rid himself of the inconvenience. His response underscores the effectiveness of persistence, even when dealing with someone as unjust as this judge. After recounting the actions of the unjust judge, Jesus shifts the focus to God's character, creating a stark contrast. "Listen to what the unjust judge says," Jesus remarks. "And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly." Here, Jesus assures his followers of God's responsiveness and justice. Unlike the judge, who acts reluctantly and selfishly, God is portrayed as loving, just, and attentive to the cries of his people. The parable assures believers that their prayers are heard, and God's justice operates in his perfect timing. The parable concludes with a challenging and introspective question. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? This question shifts the emphasis from God's faithfulness to human responsibility, encouraging believers to examine their perseverance in faith and prayer. It highlights that the ultimate challenge lies not in whether God will act, but in whether believers will remain steadfast in their trust and devotion, especially during times of trial or delay. Cultural and historical context. Understanding the historical and cultural backdrop of the parable enriches its meaning. In ancient Israel, judges were expected to uphold justice, particularly for the marginalized, such as widows and orphans. The judge in this story, however, fails to meet this ideal, emphasizing the widow's vulnerability and the strength of her persistence. Her plight reflects the broader reality of believers who must continue to trust in God's justice, even when it seems delayed. Her actions embody the biblical exhortation to pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, showing that persistence in prayer is an expression of unwavering faith. The widow's repeated pleas also serve as a metaphor for believers facing adversity. Her persistence reminds readers that prayer is not about manipulating God, but about demonstrating trust in his goodness and timing. The parable's contrast between the unjust judge and God underscores the assurance that God, unlike the judge, is always ready to hear and respond to his children. Interpretations and commentary. William Barclay highlights the sharp contrast between the judge and God, suggesting that the parable is less about persistence itself and more about the confidence believers can have in God's readiness to answer their prayers. The phrase, "how much more," emphasizes this difference. If even a corrupt judge can be moved to act, how much more will a loving God respond to the cries of his people? Joel B. Green situates the parable within the eschatological context of Luke 17:20-37, where Jesus discusses the coming of God's kingdom and the challenges believers will face while waiting for its fulfillment. Green interprets the parable as an encouragement to remain faithful and hopeful during periods of waiting or hardship. He connects it to Sirach 35, which portrays God as a righteous judge who hears the prayers of the oppressed and acts on their behalf. This interpretation aligns the widow's persistence with the broader biblical theme of God's justice for the lowly and marginalized. Cornelius A. Lapide offers additional insight into the command to always pray. He explains that this does not mean literal, unceasing prayer, as life requires time for work, rest, and other activities. Instead, it calls for perseverance and consistency in prayer, especially during times of temptation, persecution, or hardship. Lapid emphasizes the importance of dedicated time for prayer and continuing to pray with faith until God's will is fulfilled. Relational aspect of prayer. The parable also highlights the relational nature of prayer. It invites believers to approach God with confidence, knowing that He is not like the unjust judge, but a loving Father who delights in answering prayers. At the same time, Jesus' concluding question challenges believers to cultivate faith that endures. Will they continue to trust and pray, even when answers seem delayed or circumstances grow difficult? This question underscores the importance of persistence and endurance in the Christian life, particularly in maintaining faith and hope during challenging times. Modern relevance. The parable of the persistent widow remains a timeless lesson on the power of prayer, the certainty of God's justice, and the necessity of enduring faith. It reassures believers that their prayers are heard and that God's justice will ultimately prevail. At the same time, it challenges them to persist in faith and prayer, trusting in God's perfect plan and timing. By presenting the widow as a model of persistence and the unjust judge as a foil to God's character, Jesus teaches a profound truth. Persistence in prayer is both an act of faith and a testament to God's reliability. This parable encourages believers to approach God with unwavering trust and to persevere in prayer, even when circumstances feel discouraging or answers seem delayed. It reminds us that God's justice and love are unwavering, offering hope and assurance to all who seek Him with faith and perseverance. Are the end times drawing near? The question of whether the end times are approaching has intrigued humanity for centuries, sparking both spiritual reflection and speculative theories. When Jesus' disciples asked Him about the end of the world, He did not provide a specific date or time. Instead, He outlined a series of prophetic signs to signal its approach, emphasizing the importance of readiness and spiritual vigilance. This deliberate ambiguity reminds us that while the timing remains unknown, the focus should be on faithfulness and preparation. Today, the concept of the end of the world extends beyond religious discussions, capturing the interest of scientists, philosophers, and cultural commentators. For example, renowned physicist Stephen Hawking and other experts have speculated on potential existential threats, such as climate change, nuclear war, or the rise of artificial intelligence, that could profoundly alter life as we know it. This multidisciplinary concern underscores humanity's awareness of its fragility and the interconnectedness of global crises. Yet, for Christians, the end times remain rooted in biblical prophecy and the anticipation of God's ultimate plan for creation. Biblical foundations of the end times. The phrase "the end of the world" owes much of its prominence to English translations of the Bible, such as the King James Version. However, biblical scholars point out that the Greek word used in the original texts, aion, is better translated as age rather than world. This distinction suggests that Jesus' teachings on the end times refer not to the annihilation of existence, but to the conclusion of a specific era and the dawn of a new one, the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. In Matthew 24, Jesus responds to His disciples' questions about the sign of thy coming and the end of the world. Matthew 24:3, KJV. He describes events that will signal the end of the age, including wars, famines, epidemics, natural disasters, and widespread deception. These are described as the beginning of sorrows, Matthew 24:8, a phrase that underscores the intensity and urgency of these signs, while reminding believers to remain steadfast. Hope amidst tribulation. Despite the sobering warnings, Jesus' message is one of hope. He promised that the gospel of God's kingdom would be preached throughout the world before the end comes. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Matthew 24:14. This assurance highlights the transformative power of the gospel and the ultimate purpose of humanity's trials, to pave the way for God's peaceful reign. Throughout history, every generation has witnessed events that seem to align with Jesus' description of the end times, leading many to wonder if they were living in the final days. Yet Jesus warned against date setting, saying, Of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Matthew 24:36. His call to readiness and vigilance remains timeless, emphasizing spiritual preparation over speculative predictions. Lessons from Jesus' teachings. One of Jesus's most vivid comparisons about the end times is found in the story of Noah. He noted that people in Noah's time carried on with their lives, oblivious to the impending flood, until it was too late. Jesus urged his followers to stay spiritually alert, saying, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." Matthew 24:37. Similarly, in Luke 21, he warned against becoming distracted by the cares of this life, advising his disciples to watch and pray so they would be ready for his return. Luke 21:34-36. A powerful illustration of the coexistence of good and evil until the end is found in the parable of the wheat and the tares, Matthew 13:24-30. In this story, a farmer's enemy sows weeds among the wheat. Rather than uprooting the weeds immediately, the farmer allows both to grow together until the harvest, symbolizing the end of the age. At that time, the wheat, representing the faithful, will be gathered, and the tares, representing the wicked, will be separated and destroyed. This parable calls believers to genuine faith and reminds them that ultimate judgment rests with God. The comfort of God's presence. The phrase "end of the world" also appears in Jesus' Great Commission, where he assures his disciples, "Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." Matthew 28:20. Far from being a message of doom, this statement conveys a profound promise of God's enduring presence. It serves as a source of strength and encouragement for believers, reminding them that they are never alone as they navigate life's challenges and fulfill their mission to spread the gospel. Interestingly, while the Bible speaks of the end of this age, it also describes a world without end. Passages such as Isaiah 45:17 and Ephesians 3:21 point to an eternal future where God's kingdom reigns supreme. This duality, an end to the current age and the promise of a new everlasting world, underscores the transformative nature of God's plan for creation. A call to readiness. As believers reflect on Jesus' teachings about the end times, the message is clear. Preparation is not about fear or speculation, but about living with purpose and faith. Jesus emphasized the importance of aligning one's life with God's will, remaining vigilant, and cultivating a heart ready to embrace his return. This involves prioritizing spiritual growth, serving others, and trusting in God's promises. The question of whether the end times are near ultimately redirects us to a deeper consideration of our spiritual state. Are we living with the awareness that each moment carries eternal significance? Are we investing in things that endure, faith, hope, and love? Or are we preoccupied with fleeting concerns? Jesus' teachings call us to rise above the distractions of daily life and focus on what truly matters: our relationship with God and the hope of his kingdom. The Bible's depiction of the end times is both a warning and an invitation. It reminds believers of the transient nature of this world while pointing to the eternal hope found in God's kingdom. Jesus' teachings encourage vigilance, faith, and a commitment to living in alignment with his will. While the end of the world may signify the conclusion of one era, it also heralds the beginning of a new and glorious reality, where God's love, justice, and peace prevail forever. The end of the world? Why, it's good news. Discussions about the end of the world have captivated humanity for centuries, evoking emotions ranging from fear to fascination, and even amusement. While doomsday predictions often conjure grim scenarios, the Bible offers a profoundly hopeful perspective. Its teachings on the end times center on the promise of renewal and the establishment of God's kingdom, a vision filled with justice, peace, and love. Far from being a message of despair, the Bible's prophecies present an invitation to trust in a divine plan that leads to ultimate restoration. Prophecies of doom. Fact or fiction? Moments of global crisis, such as the recent COVID-19 pandemic, often reignite interest in end times predictions. In 2020, Sylvia Browne's 2008 book, End of Days, Predictions and Prophecies about the End of the World became a bestseller due to its eerie mention of a global pandemic around that year. However, Brown, like many others, has faced criticism for numerous failed predictions. Even beyond religious or mystical circles, mainstream media and scientific discussions frequently explore potential doomsday scenarios. Headlines speculate on existential threats such as climate change, nuclear war, artificial intelligence, and global pandemics. For instance, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist Doomsday Clock, a symbol of how close humanity is to catastrophe, currently stands closer to midnight than ever before. Interestingly, this focus on the end of the world is not limited to psychics or conspiracy theorists. Scientists and policymakers also grapple with the fragility of human existence, emphasizing the urgent need to address these challenges. However, the biblical narrative approaches the topic differently, offering both a warning and a promise, a divine assurance of hope and renewal beyond the trials. Understanding biblical eschatology. The study of end times, known as eschatology, explores the Bible's teachings about the future of humanity and the world. While some might associate these messages with fear, many who study biblical prophecy find them deeply reassuring. Rather than forecasting endless destruction, the Bible speaks of a grand culmination of history, the fulfillment of God's plan, and the establishment of His kingdom on earth. A new understanding of the end. When people hear the phrase end of the world, they often imagine apocalyptic scenes of chaos and devastation. However, the Bible's language is more nuanced. In Matthew 24:3, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world?" The original Greek term used for end in this context is sunteleia, which means a bringing to completion. Rather than an absolute conclusion, the end of the world refers to the completion of one age and the transition to another, a transformative moment in history. According to biblical prophecy, this transition will occur during a time of unprecedented hardship. Jesus described it as a period of great tribulation, saying, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." Matthew 24:21-22. Despite this stark warning, the Bible assures believers that God will intervene to prevent destruction, offering hope amid the trials. The end of an age, not the end of everything. Modern translations clarify that Jesus' references to the end of the world are more accurately understood as the end of the age. The Greek word aion signifies an era or epoch, much like the Iron Age or Middle Ages. The Bible describes this current period as this present evil age, Galatians 1:4, contrasting it with a future age defined by God's justice, love, and peace. The conclusion of this age signifies not annihilation, but the beginning of a renewed world, where God's perfect will is fully realized. The good news of God's kingdom. Central to Jesus' teachings is the gospel of the kingdom of God, Mark 1:14. The word gospel means good news, and this message promises a future where humanity is restored to harmony with God and creation. Consider the transformative changes described in Scripture. An end to war and the advent of peace. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Isaiah 2:4. Abundance replacing scarcity. The plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows seed. Amos 9:13. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming videos.